My mother offered me money to forgive my brother for getting my fiancée pregnant 2 months before the wedding, but I kept the money and let karma do the rest. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I'll call Lila. At that time, I really believed she would be the person I would marry. Lila and I had been together for almost 5 years, and our relationship seemed to be solid. We were both lawyers, which meant we led demanding and fast-paced lives, but we always made time for each other. The year I proposed to Lila was supposed to be the happiest year of our lives, but that same year something unexpected happened. She lost her job. The loss came after it was discovered that she had violated some company rules. I won't go into specific details because it's something personal, but I'll say that the company fired her quite unceremoniously after what she did. If you've ever met a perfectionist workaholic, you might understand how such a loss can shake the foundations to the very core. Work wasn't just a job for Lila. It was part of her identity, her pride, and her purpose. Losing it so abruptly left her so upset. Lila immediately threw herself into job searching, applying to countless firms and corporations. Unfortunately, her experience was very specialized, and opportunities weren't exactly easy to find, especially after the circumstances of her dismissal. Months passed, and she still hadn't gotten a new position. Throughout all this, I tried to be as supportive as possible. I assured her she didn't need to worry about finances. We were engaged after all, and I saw it as my responsibility to take care of her during this difficult stage. Knowing that Lila had a tendency to obsess over things and stress too much, I encouraged her to relax and not let the situation consume her. To my relief, she took my advice, or at least tried to. With her newfound free time, she decided to pursue something that had always been a dream for her: learning landscaping. She enrolled in a local landscaping class and began dedicating her free hours to this new hobby. It was also the same landscaping class that my brother Mason attended. Let me tell you a bit about Mason. He's completely opposite to me. While I was the responsible one growing up, focusing on my studies and career, Mason was the typical carefree guy. He spent his school days getting into mischief, earning a reputation as a ladies' man. That reputation followed him through college and beyond. He was the type of person who never stayed long with one girl and rarely took anything seriously. Lila had met Mason at the beginning of our relationship and knew what type of person he was. So when she started going to the same landscaping class, as Mason, I thought their paths crossing there was just a coincidence. But looking back, that's when things started to change. Over the course of a few weeks, the two became surprisingly close. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mason offered to pick her up and drop her off at class sometimes, which seemed considerate, though unusual. Lila would come home excited, telling me stories about what she and Mason had done in landscaping class or showing me photos of things they had been working on. But then their interactions extended beyond landscaping. They started going out on weekends, doing things like visiting art museums or trying new restaurants. These were activities that Lila and I normally enjoyed together, but now she was doing them with Mason instead. Over time, there were many more changes in Lila's behavior. She was spending much more time with Mason than I felt comfortable with, and this was starting to affect our relationship. She even started canceling our date nights to go out with him. I'm not the type to stay quiet and let things rot, so one night I confronted her directly. I asked her point blank if there was something between her and Mason. Lila was surprised by my question. She was even offended. She flatly denied that anything inappropriate was happening and insisted that her time with Mason was purely platonic. She explained that spending time with him was fun and light, comparing it to hanging out with a younger brother. She seemed genuinely hurt that I would even suggest anything more, and for a moment I felt guilty for doubting her. But deep down, her explanations didn't completely reassure me. Things came to a critical point just 2 months before our wedding. At that time, I was working tirelessly. I had an intense workload to make sure everything was in order financially. Since Lila lost her job, I had assumed all the economic responsibility for our household and all the wedding expenses. She hadn't found a new job yet, and although she used some of her savings for her personal needs or emergencies, I carried most of the weight. Between paying for everything and the stress of planning a wedding, my hours at the office had become longer and more exhausting. I wasn't as present as I should have been, and looking back, maybe that gave Lila and Mason the opportunity to get as close as they did. One night I came home early from a business trip. I was looking forward to surprising Lila and spending time with her. When I parked in the driveway, I immediately noticed my brother's car parked outside. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it. Mason had a habit of showing up unannounced, but this time was different. It was past 9 p.m., and seeing his car there so late raised a red flag for me. The living room was empty, but the TV was on. My eyes immediately fixed on the beer cans scattered on the floor, and then on something unmistakable: Lila's underwear carelessly thrown among them. I knew in that instant what I was about to discover. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave. But another part, the one that needed irrefutable proof, pushed me to continue. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I walked slowly and stopped at the door. There they were, Lila and Mason intertwined in the most intimate way imaginable. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't even notice I was standing there. Normally, I'm a calm and serene person, but this was betrayal of the highest order. Without saying a word, I entered the room, approached the bed, and grabbed Mason by the neck. I pulled his face away from Lila, and the shock on his face was almost satisfying. He turned to look at me, and his expression instantly changed from confusion to terror. I didn't even look at Lila. Mason immediately started stammering apologies to me, but his words meant nothing to me at that moment. I gave him a direct punch to the nose. The crack of bone gave me grim satisfaction as blood began to run down his face. He screamed in pain, but I wasn't finished. I hit him again and again, each blow falling harder than the previous one. Blood dripped from his nose and stained his shirt, but I didn't care. He stumbled backward with his hands weakly trying to block me, but I continued. When Mason was on the ground, bloodied and begging me to stop, I turned my attention to Lila. She was sitting on the bed, trembling and sobbing. I looked her directly, in the eyes, and told her she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. If she didn't, I warned her that I wouldn't hesitate to leave her in the same bloody state as my brother. She started begging me, apologizing over and over again. She said she could explain it and begged me not to throw her out, to give her a chance to fix things. But I wasn't interested in her excuses or her apologies. I looked at my watch and said coldly, "You have 9 minutes left." The tone of my voice and the look in my eyes must have told her I wasn't joking, because she hurried out of bed and began dressing with trembling hands. Tears ran down her face as she grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began packing what she could. When she finished, dragging her half-filled suitcase down the stairs, she turned to me one last time. Her voice was broken as she begged me to listen to her, claiming that she loved me and deserved the chance to explain herself. Without saying a word, I took her engagement ring from her finger and pushed her toward the door. She tried to resist, begging me to reconsider, but I was fed up. I opened the door and pushed her into the night. She stayed on the porch, still crying and screaming for forgiveness. I didn't even look back as I slammed the door in her face. Mason's face was still bloodied after our fight, and although I was still boiling with rage, I didn't want to be responsible for something worse that might happen to him. I called my parents and told them everything that had happened. My dad was furious with Mason and my mom was in shock, but both said they would come immediately. When they arrived, my mom, being a nurse, took care of Mason's wounds. She cleaned and bandaged his injuries, which fortunately were mostly superficial. Meanwhile, my dad took me to the backyard, away from Mason. I could see that my hands were still shaking with anger and that I was barely controlling myself. A little later, Mason came out to the patio with my mom. His face was full of bruises, his nose bandaged, and there were still traces of blood on his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, claiming he never intended for things to happen that way. But then he dropped the bomb. He said he was in love with Lila. I finally turned to look at him, furious. He continued explaining how he believed Lila felt the same way about him. He assured me that this had been the first time they slept together, as if that somehow made things better. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me their messages, conversations full of flirtatious texts, secrets, and Lila's confessions about how unhappy she was in our relationship. According to Mason, she was the one who invited him to stay that night, thinking I would still be on my business trip. As I read those messages, my rage began to boil again. Mason kept talking, telling me he was sorry for betraying me, but also insisting that he had never felt anything like this for anyone before. He said he couldn't stop himself and begged me to forgive him. My dad, who had been listening silently, finally had enough. He told him he was lucky if he didn't do the same thing to him that I did. But my mom's reaction was different. Mason had always been her favorite, and I could see how she struggled with the situation. My mom started telling me that regardless of what I decided to do about Lila, I needed to forgive my brother. She said he seemed genuinely sorry and that two brothers shouldn't be at odds over a woman. She even went so far as to offer me money to compensate for the wedding expenses. But when I told her I was willing to accept her check but not to apologize, she withdrew her offer. I interrupted her and told my parents that I wasn't in the mood for sermons or advice. All I wanted at that moment was for them to take Mason and leave. I couldn't stand to see him anymore. My dad nodded, understanding that I needed space, and helped Mason get in the car. My mom hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but finally followed him. In the weeks that followed, I was still dealing with the aftermath. Lila had been persistently sending me messages begging for forgiveness and trying to explain herself, but her explanations always revolved around the same tired excuses that were quite similar to what Mason had already told me. She claimed that she and Mason never intended to hurt me. I basically ignored the messages all week. Then out of nowhere, I received a phone call from Mason. He informed me that he and Lila had just discovered she was pregnant and that the baby was his. He told me that since she was expecting his child, he wanted to marry her and wanted my blessing, which I didn't give him. My mother's reaction only made everything worse. She had already been trying to act as mediator between Mason and me, but now she seemed to see Lila's pregnancy as some kind of divine intervention. She told me it was God's plan for Lila to get pregnant that way, and that maybe Mason and Lila were always destined to be together. It was as if she was trying to justify the unthinkable, to excuse what they had done because it fit into her new fantasy of becoming a grandmother. I told my mother at that moment that I knew exactly what she was doing, and that if she decided to side with Mason and Lila, our relationship would be over. I wasn't joking. My brother's betrayal was enough, but having my own mother defend him was something I couldn't accept. My father tried to stay neutral, maybe thinking that would help reduce everyone's tension. Anyway, my mother offered Lila financial support, assuring her that she and the baby would be well cared for. But of course, there was a condition. My mother insisted that she and Mason had to get married. After all, that's what Mason wanted, too. Mom was relentless in her pursuit of this outcome, refusing to even consider the idea of her grandchild being born out of wedlock. When I discovered that Mason and Lila were really going to get married and had started sending wedding invitations to our relatives, I felt furious and humiliated. Without arguing further, I simply kept my word and cut my mother and brother out of my life. However, my mother doesn't give up easily. For weeks after the breakup, she called me nonstop, left voicemails, and even showed up at my door uninvited, trying to guilt me into reconciling. It was suffocating. That's when I knew the only way to escape her was to leave town completely. It's been 3 years since they destroyed my life, and I moved to a new city, cutting ties with almost everyone in my family except my father. He respected my decision to move and understood why I needed the distance, though it saddened him that I no longer visited them. In these 3 years, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I didn't share my new number with anyone except my dad. I made new friends, found a sense of normalcy again, and worked hard to leave the past behind. So imagine my surprise when yesterday I found Lila at my door ringing the bell. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her at first. Lila looked nothing like the woman I once loved. She looked as if she was sick or had suffered a lot during this time. She was there holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't be more than 2 or 3 years old. The girl had Mason's sharp features, which left no doubt that he was the father. I wondered why she was here, how she found me, what she wanted. Finally, I broke the silence. "Lila, what are you doing here?" She was crying as she asked if she could come in, saying she had something important to discuss with me. My first instinct was to say no and send them back, but then I looked at the little girl beside her, looking at me with those innocent, open eyes. I couldn't be rude in front of the child, so I stepped aside and gestured for them to come in, showed them to the couch, and offered them water. Once they were settled, I sat across from them and asked, "What are you doing here?" I already knew she wouldn't have found me on her own. I hadn't given my address to anyone except my dad, and I trusted he would keep it secret unless something really important came up. So what was so important that he would give her my location? Instead of answering immediately, Lila reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to me without saying a word. I opened it and immediately recognized my mother's handwriting. My mother had written bluntly that it was my responsibility to fix the mess that Mason had created. She explained how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had abandoned them, and how, as Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I should help them, because Lila was the woman who was almost going to be my wife, and the child was my niece. I looked at Lila, confused and angry. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked her. That's when Lila broke down and started telling me the whole story. According to her, Mason had always been unfaithful in their marriage from the beginning, even after Lila gave birth to their daughter Jessie. My brother continued having affairs intermittently throughout the time they were together. For her part, Lila had tried to make things work, hoping they would improve over time, even if only for Jessie's sake. But 3 months ago, Mason abruptly packed his things and left without explanations, without a note, without warnings. He just disappeared. Since then, Lila had been alone. She had no job, no savings, no home. She and Mason lived in a rented house, and without him, she couldn't afford to stay. My mom, feeling some kind of obligation to Jessie, had been giving Lila money to support them. But now, with Mason practically gone forever, my mom had decided she no longer wanted to be responsible for Lila and her daughter. Lila continued telling me that my mother wanted me to take care of her and Jessie since they had nowhere to go and no one else to turn to. I felt completely disgusted by what she was asking and how ridiculous it was that both she and my mother expected me to help. My mother not only sided with Mason during the initial betrayal, but now she was trying to throw the consequences of his actions onto me. My mother's relentless favoritism toward Mason was coming back as usual. I immediately told Lila, quite directly, and in front of her daughter, that she had no right to expect any help from me. This wasn't my daughter. She was no longer my fiancée. And clearly this wasn't my responsibility. Although I felt bad that Mason simply abandoned her, she should have seen it coming. After all, he's not the most trustworthy or responsible person. I wasn't going to let myself be manipulated into helping, so I asked Lila to leave. She started crying, saying she had nowhere to go, no money, and that what she had left she had spent on gas to come see me. I ended up giving her enough to fill her tank before asking her to leave. So that's my story with my mother and her favoritism. I recently discovered this subreddit about parents who have favoritism for one child, and I found it interesting to tell my story. I want to clarify some things. My mom's behavior in this situation is also completely baffling to me. The fact that she's trying to guilt me into helping Lila and her daughter after everything that's happened seems incredibly selfish to me. I understand she may feel obligated because of her granddaughter, but she shouldn't expect me to clean up the mess her golden child left, especially after how everything turned out when I was the one who was betrayed. If my mother wants to have a favorite child, then she can have him, but she also has to take care of him. I agree with some of your comments that my dad also betrayed me. Instead of offering me the support I needed after everything that happened, he adopted a neutral stance. Although he scolded my brother that time, he never really sided with me completely. By not challenging my mother's manipulative behavior, he also played a role in this betrayal. I plan to have a conversation with him soon. It's true that Mason left Lila, but that doesn't automatically put the responsibility on me to take care of her. She made her decisions, and although I can feel some sympathy for her given the circumstances, I don't owe her anything. The fact that she showed up at my door with nothing but a sad story and a child only highlights her desperation. I didn't reject her out of spite, I simply made it clear that it's not my job to fix what Mason broke. I'm not obligated to take care of her just because she's now in a difficult situation. No, that child is definitely not mine. Lila and I had already broken up weeks before she got pregnant, and by the time we ended things, we had long since stopped being intimate. The timeline is clear, and there's absolutely no possibility that I'm the father, so there's no need for a test or anything. Besides, Jesse has all of Mason's features, his face, his eyes, his smile. It's like seeing him as a child. I have no doubt that Mason is her father. I don't need to take a paternity test because the resemblance is unmistakable. The child is undoubtedly Mason's daughter, and I'm not going to let myself get dragged into more confusion. No, I don't want to adopt my niece. I can't believe some of you are even suggesting this. Regardless of Lila's financial or emotional situation, she is the mother, and it's her responsibility. I don't understand why she never worked after getting married or why she didn't save. Mason is the father, so even if they separate, both Lila and Mason must take responsibility for caring for their daughter. Mason has no choice but to pay child support. Update 2: I spoke with my parents about everything. I already knew my dad had given Lila my address, but I wanted to hear it directly from him. I called him and asked him point blank why he agreed to share my location with her after I had repeatedly asked him not to, and what he expected me to do for Lila and her daughter after all these years. My dad was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. Then he sighed deeply and apologized. "I'm sorry, son, I'm really sorry," he said. "We did everything we could to help Lila, but with Mason gone for so long, we could only do so much. Your mom begged me to give her your address. She said maybe if she saw you after all this time, you'd want to help her somehow since she has nowhere to go." I felt my frustration rising and asked him, "Why would you think I'd want to help someone like her? She betrayed me with Mason. She hurt me. And now you want me to help her?" My dad told me he understood why I was angry. He explained that neither he nor my mom wanted things to end this way, but that Lila and Jesse were also family to them now. He believed I was their only option. He apologized to me again, but I didn't listen. I told him that he and I were done. I had trusted that he would be different from my mom, but it turned out they were all the same. Backstabbing traitors. Did they really think that somehow I was going to forget the past, accept Lila and my brother's daughter into my life, and start taking care of them? Wow, it's a hard blow to realize that my parents really didn't care about me. I told my dad firmly, and without hesitation, to lose my number and forget I ever existed for him. Since he knew my address, I warned him that if he or my mom showed up at my house, I would call the police. My dad tried to apologize again, begging me to listen to him, but I was no longer interested. "Don't call me again," I told him simply. "Just don't. You made your decisions and I'm making mine." If he expected me to let him say one last thing, I'm sorry for him. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. What my dad has done is unforgivable and there's no going back. Update 3. It's been almost a month since my last update. I was finally able to locate Mason with the help of one of my friends. It turns out Lila was right. Mason has been living with his latest conquest in a nearby town, pretending he has no responsibilities, as if he had no family. It doesn't surprise me. That's how he's been his whole life. I can't believe this is the same guy who told me with a serious face that he was in love with Lila 3 years ago. The same guy who turned my life upside down. And now, after all that, when he got bored of Lila and her daughter, he was living with someone else. Lila knew it. She knew what my brother was like and still decided to cheat on me with him. So I don't feel sorry for her. It's like being told something is hot and still deciding to touch it. Well, you're going to get burned. After finding out where he was, I sent the address to Lila. I didn't want to get involved in more of her drama, but I also didn't want to abandon a child who was guilty of having a pair of idiots as parents. So I gave her one last piece of advice. You need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it now before Mason disappears to another place. Lila thanked me for everything, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, as she had done so many times before, but I was no longer interested in listening to her. I'm done, I texted her. Don't contact me again. Don't show up at my door. This is the last thing I do for you. What we had, whatever. It was, ended long ago. I just wanted her to stop disturbing my peace forever. Update 4, to tell you about this update, I must give you some context about my brother. My brother never really finished college, and since he left it, he's been living off temporary jobs mostly. That's why he was taking a landscaping class. He wanted to get work in that field. But the type of jobs he usually gets allow him not to be tied to any place, and if you've read my previous posts, you'll know where I'm going. Yes, my brother has moved. Although fled is the best word to define it. Apparently, he knew Lila was looking for him to sue him for child support, and the first thing he did was flee from his former girlfriend's house. That's what Lila discovered when she went to that girlfriend's house to talk to him, but he had already left. His girlfriend told her that he moved and that she doesn't know where he is, but whether that's true or just a lie, no one can know. Meanwhile, I found out about all this because Lila wrote me an email telling me about the matter, all to ask me to help her look for him again. But I told her she had betrayed me again by not complying with my request not to contact me anymore, so I wouldn't help her with anything. My father also betrayed me when he asked me for forgiveness behind my mother's back when they showed up at my house. I'm not going to bore you telling you what they wanted because you already know, but I told them to their faces that I wasn't going to use any more of my money on that woman. I had already wasted a lot on a wedding that didn't take place, and it seemed fine to them. So my mother said she could give me back part of the money if I took care of Lila and my niece. I replied that if she was willing to write a check at that moment, maybe, just maybe, I would take the time to think about whether it was a good idea to waste my time deciding whether to accept Lila back or not. Which translates to, very likely, not, but she told me she needed assurance that if she wrote a check, she was going to get results. I told her it would be a gamble on her part. She thought about it for a while and wrote me a check for $5,000. That doesn't even cover a quarter of the wedding, but something is better than nothing. Then I told them to leave because the check didn't include not calling the police if they showed up at my house. So they left pretty quickly. I was thinking for a few seconds whether I should use my time to think about accepting Lila or not. And after long seconds of very deep thought, I came to the conclusion that no. I think it took me longer to deposit the check than to decide it. The sayo. Good thing is that the check had funds. I communicated this to my mother by phone, which she didn't take very well because according to her, if I had taken her money, I should at least fulfill what I promised. But even if I had signed a contract, the check was just to consider it, and what's worse, to think if it was good to consider it, and I've already thought about it more than necessary for a topic that doesn't matter to me. Maybe if the check had been bigger, I would have considered it for a few more seconds, but the decision would have been the same. Bad idea for my mother to mess with a betrayed lawyer. Update. 5. My mother has asked me to return the money, but I've told her to sue me if she thinks she has a legal basis to do so. There isn't even a text message, and if she recorded my conversation, when I called her to tell her no, there's also no mention that I would accept Lila back for money. It would be an interesting case in court, plus the possibility of a countersuit on my part. My brother has appeared and Lila has finally served him the papers. And guess who my brother wants to represent him? Good luck getting someone to do the work for free because I won't do it and he has no money. And good luck to Lila trying to get something from my brother. If she wanted financial security, at least she shouldn't have chosen a loser.